Thanks so much for that introduction. I am glad to be part of FDA's REdI conference this year to share updates on the important area of supply chain security and integrity. Now, many may not realize what is happening in the background to help ensure that prescription drugs in the pharmacy and then dispensed to patients are safe and authentic. Today, this presentation is about advances in drug supply chain security with a focus on distribution. A prescription drug travels through the supply chain and several entities may handle the product before it reaches the pharmacy. And I will share our efforts to protect the supply chain since 2013. These efforts address the distribution of potentially suspect or illegitimate products like counterfeits or stolen drugs. My learning objectives today are to review advances in drug supply chain security, focusing on the distribution of drugs in the United States and the requirements under the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, or DSCSA. In addition, I'll describe our efforts to better detect counterfeits and other illegitimate products in the supply chain, to prevent these products from entering the supply chain, and to respond in a way to protect patients from receiving these products. I just want to note that this presentation is intended only to provide a general overview and highlights and is not intended to be comprehensive or constitute legal advice. So please refer to the appropriate guidelines, regulations, or law for specific information. And any updates and links to FDA documents or notices summarized in this presentation can be found on FDA's website, and I'll provide a few links at the end of my presentation. So that you can understand what guides work within my office and our organization as a whole, my office, the Office of Drug Security, Integrity, and Response, or ODSIR for short, is located in FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, or CDER, Office of Compliance. CDER's Office of Compliance's mission is to shield patients from poor quality, unsafe, and ineffective drugs through proactive compliance strategies and risk-based enforcement actions. This slide shows you where ODSIR resides within CDER's Office of Compliance, and along with the other sub-offices, our efforts across the entire life cycle of a drug product help to ensure that U.S. consumers receive safe, effective, and high-quality drugs. ODSIR's program areas work in concert with each other to holistically protect the integrity of the supply chain, and FDA remains committed to preventing potentially dangerous drug products from reaching and harming U.S. consumers. I want to highlight a few supply chain challenges, some of which are recent and others represent continued challenges that we have seen over the past few years. For example, recalls due to product quality issues like impurities or particulates. This is an ongoing challenge for some companies who need to understand the root causes and take corrective actions to address the issue, and of course learn how to minimize the chances of it happening again. And our COVID-19 response included dealing with drug shortages and distribution issues of drugs and biologics, like vaccines and other treatments. The Internet remains a challenge where sellers offer unapproved and misbranded drugs for sale to U.S. consumers. Our recent efforts to combat the illegal Internet activity resulted in issuing of warning letters to websites illegally offering drugs like antibiotics, antivirals, cancer drugs, and even opioids for sale to U.S. consumers. We've also had some collaboration to combat online sales of unapproved and misbranded drugs that resulted in FDA carrying out 3 opioid online summits that help to foster discussion with different stakeholders and look for strategies to combat this illegal Internet activity. In highlighting counterfeits and other illegitimate products, while the U.S. supply chain is one of the safest in the world, we have had a few occurrences and must remain vigilant to protect the supply chain. In the next few minutes, I will review some of the advances in federal requirements for members of the supply chain that increase the transparency and accountability to help improve supply chain integrity. This will protect U.S. consumers from receiving illegitimate products. I will take a few moments to review the pharmaceutical supply chain. Drugs are produced by manufacturers and typically distributed through wholesale distributors to pharmacies, but there may be other players. Some of these other players may be unscrupulous players, and these are the ones that may sell or distribute illegitimate product. We want to keep the bad product out of the supply chain, and we don't want illegitimate product to reach patients. So, as the threats to the supply chain can occur at any point, this is why strong oversight of the supply chain is so important to protect it. Advances in supply chain security include implementation of DSCSA requirements. FDA and the supply chain have been working hard to implement interoperable electronic tracing of product across the entire supply chain since 2013. This enhances our ability to protect consumers from exposure to drugs that may be counterfeit, stolen, contaminated, or otherwise harmful. DSCSA also improves detection and removal of these potentially dangerous drugs from the supply chain. And I'll be reviewing our proposed regulations that help to establish national licensure standards for wholesale drug distributors and third-party logistics providers who are involved in the storage, warehousing, and distribution of drugs. So who needs to comply with DSCSA requirements? Well, trading partners do, and these are defined by our statute. So this includes manufacturers, repackagers, wholesale distributors, or wholesale drug distributors, or WDD for short, dispensers, which includes pharmacies and other healthcare professionals. However, the key DSCSA requirements that I will review apply primarily to pharmacies. And then there are third-party logistics providers, or 3PLs, that I'll explain more in detail later. Your activities that you perform will determine which trading partner category you fall into and therefore which requirements apply to you, noting that you may meet more than one trading partner definition. What drug products are we referring to here for DSCSA requirements? Well, these two definitions are very important. They define which products are covered by the requirements in Section 582 of the Act. As you can see, product is defined to include prescription drugs in finished form, with a few exceptions, like blood or blood components intended for transfusion or imaging drugs. There are also many exclusions to the definition of a transaction that would make those situations out of scope of the requirements. So please refer to the full definitions in Section 581.13 and 581.24 for the specifics of each exception or exclusion. In order to better understand the 2023 requirements for enhanced drug distribution security, we need to look at the current requirements that are in effect, and I will discuss how these requirements change in 2023. The requirements summarized here all began in 2015. Now recall that I talked about who is a trading partner earlier. All trading partners must be authorized. This means that they should have proper FDA registration if you're a manufacturer or repackager, or appropriately licensed and meet FDA reporting requirements if a wholesale distributor or third-party logistics provider, or if you are a dispenser, have a valid state license. The exact requirements vary depending on the entity's trading partner status, but taken together, these requirements further secure the supply chain by ensuring that trading partners who are transacting product with one another are authorized. Current product tracing is conducted at the lot level, meaning lot level information is included and exchanged in the documentation associated with a transaction, and this is either in paper or electronic formats. And of course, additional requirements include responding to information requests and record keeping. Now, verification requirements also became effective in 2015, which outlined robust investigatory steps for trading partners to take when they encounter suspect or illegitimate product. As I mentioned earlier, product tracing involves exchanging the documentation related to a transaction. In other words, each time a prescription drug is sold, the seller must provide this information to the buyer. And this information includes the transaction information, or TI, the transaction history, or TH, and the transaction statement, or TS. And you can see the specific information that's included in each one of these on the slide. Now, I do want to stress that the current product tracing is being done at the lot level, and this means that lot level information is included in the TI unless an exclusion applies. In November 2023, the product tracing requirements change when enhanced drug distribution security requirements go into effect, and product tracing becomes done down to the package level. And this means package level information is provided in each transaction and will include relevant serial numbers. The transaction history sunsets and is no longer provided, and I'll explain that a little more later. And also, the requirement will be to exchange it electronically. Let's take a few moments to talk about verification requirements and what you need to do to investigate and properly handle suspect or illegitimate products. Now, the definitions are shown here for suspect product and illegitimate product, and while the definitions are very similar, the main difference is you have credible evidence that a product is illegitimate product. That means that once you've made that determination, the product is counterfeit, diverted, stolen, subject of a fraudulent transaction, intentionally adulterated, or appears otherwise unfit for distribution. And with illegitimate product, there's an additional requirement to notify FDA and other immediate trading partners within 24 hours of that determination. And while some of these activities may have occurred before DSCSA was passed, DSCSA puts these requirements in place for a more robust investigatory steps for handling suspect and illegitimate product, in addition to documentation and record keeping of such investigations. Now, this slide shows the first page of the Form FDA 3911, and a trading partner can use this form to notify FDA of illegitimate product within 24 hours of determination. And we've been receiving illegitimate product notifications since 2015. Each one of these gets reviewed to determine what is the appropriate follow-up to protect public health. For example, some of these may not turn out to be confirmed counterfeit or a confirmed illegitimate product, or may not rise to the level of a full investigation, while others are confirmed illegitimate product and do rise to the level of a full investigation. The Form 3911 can also be used to provide additional or follow-up information to FDA during an investigation or inquiry, and then the 3911 should be used when a trading partner wants to request a termination of notification. So while we are reminding you on this slide that there's also a requirement to notify immediate trading partners within 24 hours of determination, a trading partner can decide how to do that based on its own business practices. And this form, the 3911, is to be used to communicate to FDA about illegitimate product, or in some cases for manufacturers, products with high risk of illegitimacy. And you can find more information about this and other specifics in our guidance related to identification of suspect product and notification. So as we continue to look at what advances have been made, we see that in 2018 there was a key step for helping to identify prescription drugs more uniquely. And this is part of the product identifier requirement, where a manufacturer or a repackager added product identifiers on their product packages. And a component of the product identifier is a unique serial number. This means each package includes a serial number along with the National Drug Code, or NDC, lot number, and expiration date in both human-readable and machine-readable formats. The machine-readable format is a 2D data matrix barcode. While several verification requirements remain the same, including quarantine and investigation of suspect product, and quarantine, disposition, and notifications of illegitimate product, once products were serialized with the product identifier, the verification requirements changed to package level from verifying only lot level information. This means that trading partners would begin checking product identifiers as part of the investigatory verification steps for suspect and illegitimate product, and also prior to transacting with saleable returns. So while, like other requirements we've discussed, the exact requirements vary by trading partner, so you'll need to look at the specific provisions per trading partner to get the full details of that requirement. Now this brings us to the upcoming phase of 2023 requirements. These are the Enhanced Drug Distribution Security requirements that go into effect November 2023. And these outline all electronic transaction data to be exchanged, along with enhanced product tracing and enhanced verification, which I'll discuss more in a few minutes. So 2023 and beyond, one of the major goals of DSCSA will be in place to achieve enhanced drug distribution security across the entire supply chain that will help to keep patients safe. So it's time for challenge question number 1. Which DSCSA requirements help to improve supply chain integrity? A trading partner must be authorized. B, product tracing information, which includes transaction information, history, and statement, is exchanged with each transaction of product between trading partners. C, verification requirements, which includes notification of illegitimate product within 24 hours of determination, allow FDA and trading partners to better respond when illegitimate product is found in the supply chain. D, manufacturers and repackagers are required to encode product identifiers on each drug package on the smallest individual saleable unit. Or E, all of the above. The answer is E, all of the above. All of these represent key DSCSA requirements that are currently in effect. They are the authorized trading partner, product tracing, verification, and product identifier requirements. So this slide has a lot of words and text, but basically it's here to spell out the law and specify the provisions of the law for the enhanced drug distribution security requirements that go into effect on November 27, 2023. And I'll attempt to explain these in more simple terms in the next few slides, but recognize that several of the provisions have additional language that have to be considered for the full requirement. So again, I'll refer you back to the law and Section 582G1 of the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act for specifics of each one of these enhanced requirements. Based on the 6 enhanced drug distribution requirements of Section 582G1 that was shown on the previous slide, I'll be translating and covering these requirements in terms of what is viewed as part of either enhanced product tracing or enhanced verification. And the enhanced requirements build on the product tracing and verification requirements that are currently in effect and the activities surrounding these requirements. For enhanced product tracing, we're referring to how the exchange of transaction information and transaction statement changes, how the transaction information changes to what we call serialized TI or serialized transaction information, and certain situations when FDA or another appropriate federal or state official requests for information, or if a trading partner makes such a request, and the circumstances around that request. And for enhanced verification, we're referring to verification down to the package level and checking information for saleable returns. So I'll discuss these in a little more detail, along with some additional operational aspects that come into play with the enhanced supply chain security requirements. For the next couple of slides, I'll be focusing on enhanced product tracing, starting with the exchange of transaction information and transaction statement. So under Section 582G1A of the Act, this requires that the transaction information and the statement be exchanged in a secure, interoperable electronic manner. Now, electronic manner is critical when we're thinking about what changes in 2023 with these enhanced requirements. And exchanging of the information refers to the product tracing information, meaning the TI and the TS. And the selling trading partner provides this information to the purchasing trading partner. Now, some trading partners may be doing this electronically now, but technically this will be required for all trading partners beginning November 27, 2023. Currently, the exchange of product tracing information with each transaction of product includes the transaction history, along with the TI and the TS that I've talked about already. But because the requirement to provide and receive the transaction history, or TH, is no longer in effect on November 27, 2023, the product tracing information post-2023 involves providing just TI and TS with each transaction. The sunset provision for the transaction history can be found in Section 582K of the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act. So, as TH is no longer provided to the purchasing trading partner, the other provision that's noted here on the slide is Section 582G1E of the Act, and this requires systems and processes to promptly facilitate gathering of the information necessary to produce the transaction information for each transaction going back to the manufacturer as applicable. And this will need to be done in an electronic manner, and I'll take some more time to talk about those conditions and this requirement in a later slide. So another enhanced drug distribution security provision is under Section 582G1B, which requires that the TI must include the product identifier at the package level for each package included in the transaction. So this means that the data elements of the product identifier need to be in the transaction information. And these data elements include the NDC, serial number, lot number, and expiration date. While the NDC and lot number were already required to be part of the TI, which is shown on the left here, the serial number and expiration date need to be incorporated into the TI starting November 2023, which is shown on the right side. This is what we refer to serialized transaction information, or serialized TI. Note, this also means that the transaction documentation, the TI, and the package, the product package, will now both have the product identifier information. We have a guidance that describes recommendations for how the TI and the product information can be reconciled, as, for example, the TI will be provided electronically and may get to the purchasing trading partner at a different point than when the product physically arrives. So this guidance is known as the Enhanced Drug Distribution Security at the Package Level under DSCSA, and so I'll refer you to that guidance. With everything moving to electronic formats, serialized TI and packages with product tracing information, selling trading partners should develop and use processes that can automate the recording of the electronic data in their transaction information and transaction statements associated with product that is physically shipped to a purchasing trading partner. And this will enable processes like gathering relevant product tracing information when requested, which is what I'm going to talk about next. What do I mean by gathering relevant product tracing information in response to a request? Well, these requirements are described in Sections 582G1D and E of the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act, and they're shown on the slide on the right side. Basically, beginning in November 2023, in the event of a recall or for the purposes of investigating suspect or illegitimate product, trading partners are required to have the systems and processes necessary to promptly respond with the transaction information and transaction statement for a product. In addition, trading partners will also need to be able to promptly facilitate the gathering of information necessary to produce the transaction information for each transaction going back to the manufacturer as applicable upon request by FDA or another appropriate federal or state official. Now, as you can see, the statutory provisions are pretty dense, so realize that in certain circumstances, a trading partner can also make a request for certain product tracing information from another trading partner. The enhanced drug distribution security requirements will enable appropriate requesters to receive product tracing information from any trading partner that's involved in a transaction related to a specific product when requesting for that information as part of, say, an investigation of suspect or illegitimate product, or in the event of a recall. So, for example, if FDA is investigating an illegitimate product, as the requester, FDA would send a request for relevant product tracing information to the trading partner, so we would request the TI and the TS, and that trading partner should respond and provide the relevant TI and TS to FDA. So if FDA sends requests to multiple trading partners for TI and TS relevant to a particular product, then each trading partner should respond and provide the relevant TI and TS to FDA. So an authorized trading partner may make a similar type of request for facilitating the gathering of information if it's investigating suspect product. They may request the relevant transaction information as applicable. Let's talk about enhanced verification. And enhanced verification needs to include incorporation and use of the product identifier, specifically verifying the product at the package level, including the NDC and serial number. So while the verification requirements that began in 2015 remain in effect, phased-in verification related to the product identifier also went into effect in 2018 for manufacturers and repackagers, 2019 for wholesale distributors, and 2020 for dispensers. And so remember, the product identifiers are not only on product packages and homogeneous cases at this point, but they should also be part of the electronic product tracing information. So when we are speaking about verification of product that has been distributed, Section 582G1C requires that a trading partner has systems and processes in place for verification of product at the package level. And upon receiving a request for verifying product, the trading partner should use processes that automate verification of the product down to the package level. It could also mean that the process for requesting the verification may also be done in different ways. So our slide shows that it could be done by reading of the 2D data matrix barcode to initiate a request. And of course, how the response to the request is managed and communicated back to the requester can also be done in different ways. But the trading partner's individual systems should enable quick verification of suspect and illegitimate product, including a direct response to the requester. So remember, the request for verification of a product may come from FDA or another trading partner, and the request and response should be electronic, interoperable, and in a standardized manner. So the last enhanced requirement related to enhanced verification is related to saleable returns. And I just spoke in more general terms about enhanced verification for distributed product. This last provision focuses on what a trading partner must do in 2023, whereby they need to have systems and processes in place to associate saleable return product with the applicable transaction information and transaction statement. And this is required under Section 582G1F of the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act. So remember, the product identifier is now included in the TI and should be on the package itself in both human and machine readable formats. So this capability will help enable trading partners to accept saleable returns that are appropriate for sale and distribution into the pharmaceutical distribution supply chain. And we encourage trading partners to develop and use processes that can automate this verification of the associated electronic data in the TI and TS with the return product. So note that a trading partner's individual systems and processes may be similar for the general verification as for verification of saleable returns, and FDA anticipates that some trading partners may choose to use the same systems and processes for both types of verification. So we have many DSCSA guidances for industry, including draft and final guidances that are relevant to these requirements that I've reviewed. So please check our website to get the most current version of the guidance. And I will note that some of our recent guidances focus on the verification requirements, product identifier requirements, and enhanced drug distribution security requirements, and there are more details in each respective guidance. I want to review some important definitions as I focus on the oversight of the distribution of prescription drugs. The key trading partners in the supply chain for these activities are wholesale distributors. We also refer to them as wholesale drug distributors, so WDDs, and third-party logistics providers, or 3PLs. So first, let's review the wholesale distributor definitions. Under Section 581.29 of the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act, a wholesale distributor is defined as a person other than a manufacturer's co-licensed partner, a third-party logistics provider, or a repackager that is engaged in wholesale distribution. And so wholesale distribution is defined in Section 503E4 of the Act, and this means distribution of a drug subject to Section 503B, meaning a prescription drug, to a person other than a consumer or patient, or receipt of a prescription drug by a person other than a consumer or patient. Now note that Section 503E4 contains several exceptions from the general definition of wholesale distribution that are not covered in this slide. Therefore, you will need to review the specific provision for those exclusions or exceptions. Now, to understand how third-party logistics providers, or 3PLs, are different from wholesale distributors, let's take a closer look at how they are defined. Under Section 581.22 of the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act, a third-party logistics provider is defined as an entity that provides or coordinates warehousing or other logistics services of a product in interstate commerce on behalf of a manufacturer, wholesale distributor, or dispenser of a product, but does not take ownership of the product, nor have responsibility to direct the sale or disposition of the product. I want to point out this key difference, that a 3PL does not take ownership of the product, nor have responsibility to direct the sale or disposition of that product, and works on behalf of another trading partner. And since other logistics services is not defined in DSCSA, the proposed rule that I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes includes Section 205.3I, which describes these activities. Now let's talk about the proposed regulations that helps to increase the oversight over wholesale distributors and third-party logistics providers, and why these regulations are so important. In issuing this rule, FDA is proposing to replace the current regulations in the Code of Federal Regulations, that is 21 CFR Part 205, with this new Part 205 that will implement the licensure requirements of the DSCSA and govern the licensure of third-party logistics providers and wholesale distributors. When finalized, this rule will replace the existing 21 CFR Part 205 in its entirety. In passing the DSCSA, Congress recognized the need for national standards for the storage, handling, and transport of prescription drugs, and directed FDA in Sections 583A and 584D of the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act to establish such standards by regulation. This slide outlines FDA's authority under which these regulations are being promulgated. The Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act requires that FDA establish by regulation the standards for licensing of wholesale distributors under Section 503E1 of the Act. As provided by Section 503E1, subject to Section 583, no wholesale distributor may engage in wholesale distribution of a drug unless they are licensed by the state from which the drug is distributed, or if the state has not established a licensure framework, is licensed by FDA. In addition, if the drug is distributed interstate and the state into which the drug is being distributed requires a license to ship into that state, the wholesale distributor must be licensed by that state. So all state and federal licenses described in Section 503E1 must meet the standards established by FDA through this rulemaking once it's effective. Furthermore, the Act also requires FDA to issue regulations regarding the standards for licensing of 3PLs under Section 584 of the Act. And similar to wholesale distributors, in accordance with the FDA regulations once they're effective, a 3PL must be licensed by the state from which they conduct 3PL activities, or by FDA if the state does not have a licensure program for 3PLs. Also similar to wholesale drug distributors, a 3PL must have a license to distribute into a different state if that state requires such license to distribute into the state. A distinction for 3PLs is that if 3PL is licensed by FDA and ships interstate, it is not required to have a license from any state into which the 3PL ships. So again, the proposed rule, when finalized, will establish the national standards for licensure of wholesale drug distributors and 3PLs required under Section 583 and 584 of the Act as amended by DSCSA. Now, the need for this regulation stems from several factors that have resulted in illegitimate product in the supply chain due to diversion schemes or criminal activity. So when finalized and effective, the rule will provide much-needed certainty and clarity for wholesale distributors and 3PLs seeking licensure. The requirements for wholesale distributors currently vary significantly across state lines, and many wholesale distributors and 3PLs have facilities in multiple states. Specifically, states' requirements and standards for licensure currently vary in areas like the length of time for which records must be maintained, qualifications for facility managers and designated representatives, facility requirements, license duration, and renewal procedures, just to name a few. Theft and diversion of prescription drugs continues to be major issues that the effects cascade throughout the supply chain to consumers and often involve products distributed by unlicensed wholesale distributors. So FDA standards, oversight, and regulations, including those that are implemented under DSCSA, will lessen product diversion and other threats to the legitimate supply chain. So when this regulation is effective, every U.S. wholesale distributor and 3PL facility will be held to these standards and the statute's licensure requirements. And where a state does not have a licensing program in accordance with the regulation, FDA will be the licensing authority. When will these regulations go into effect? Well, DSCSA states that the national licensing standards for wholesale distributors established by the regulation take effect 2 years after the date such regulation is published. In addition, the law states that the national licensing standards for 3PLs take effect 1 year after the date of such final regulation is published. Now, FDA recognized that 1 year may not be sufficient time for states to implement 3PL licensing programs if states decide to implement such programs and for 3PLs to apply for licensure under these programs. For this reason, FDA is proposing to not enforce the requirements with respect to the national standards for licensure of 3PLs until 2 years after the regulation is finalized, in order to provide states with the opportunity to establish or modify their licensure programs in accordance with the new standards, and also time for 3PLs to apply and obtain a new license. Also in this proposed rule, we explain our interpretation of Section 585B1 of the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act as preempting states and localities from establishing or continuing requirements for 3PLs or wholesale distributors licensing that are different from the standards and requirements applicable under the regulations. In other words, states and local governments may not establish or continue licensure requirements for 3PLs or wholesale distributors unless those state requirements are the same as federal requirements. Different requirements are preempted. Regarding the timing of the preemption, state and local licensure requirements, which are inconsistent with federal requirements, as reflected in the regulation, will be preempted only once the regulation is finalized and takes effect. And until such time, current state and local licensing of wholesalers and 3PLs may continue. So a complete description of and discussion of this is in the section of the proposed rule labeled as effective date of the preemption. Now, FDA is proposing in the revised Part 205 to establish national standards for licensing by state and federal licensing authorities that would apply to 3PL facilities in any state, and also national standards for licensing that would apply to wholesale distributors of prescription drugs in any state. So this part establishes standards, terms, and conditions for licensing of 3PLs and prescription drug wholesale distributors by state and federal licensing authorities, including a process for revocation, reissuance, and renewal of such licenses. This part also establishes processes and standards for FDA to use approved third-party organizations to evaluate the qualifications of 3PLs for licensure and also conduct inspections of wholesale distributor facilities. So amongst other provisions, only some of which are noted on this slide, sections 21 CFR 205.4 through 205.19 cover the proposed 3PL licensure standards, and 21 CFR sections 205.20 to 205.33 cover the proposed wholesale distributor licensure standards. So I'll refer you to the proposed rule for the specifics of each provision. For more detailed information about our proposed rule on national standards for licensure for wholesale distributors and 3PLs, please see our webinar that is posted on our website. And as part of the rulemaking process, the proposed rule is published, which allows for stakeholders to review and provide comments to the agency to consider before finalization. And so for those of you that are interested, you can submit your input or comments to our public docket for the proposed regulations until September 6, 2022. So for instructions on how to submit comments, please go to the Federal Register notice for those instructions. Okay, for challenge question number 2, is the following statement true or false? National standards for licensure for wholesale distributors and third-party logistics providers will harmonize requirements and standards for licensure across state lines. A, true, or B, false? The answer is A, true. Remember that one key need for the regulation is that licensure requirements vary from state to state. FDA remains committed to our ongoing and collaborative efforts to ensure that U.S. consumers receive safe, effective, and high-quality drugs and to secure the supply chain for medical products. We'll use our regulatory tools and authorities to detect and prevent illegitimate products from entering the supply chain and respond rapidly when illegitimate products are found. And we look forward to continuing to engage with supply chain stakeholders for successful implementation of the requirements under the DSCSA. Look for more DSCSA policy, interpretation, and recommendations in our published guidances, and look for opportunities to engage on implementation efforts, whether it be an FDA public meeting or other stakeholder meeting or workshop. Here are FDA resources for you. Everything that I have reviewed in the current presentation can be found on FDA's website. We do encourage you to check these links for updates to ensure that you have the most current information. And I want to thank you for your attention, and now I think there is time for some questions.
Thank you, Captain Jung, for the great presentation. We'll now transition into our Q&A session. If you haven't had a chance to enter your questions into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Looks like we have some questions coming in right now. And the first question for Captain Jung is the following. Will exemptions be allowed for gene therapy products with patient-specific dosing from DSCSA serialization and FD&C Act Section 582?
Okay, that's a good question. Now, I won't be able to address gene therapy products specifically, but we do have a process for companies to request a waiver, exception, or exemption from certain DSCSA requirements in Section 582. And we do have a draft guidance on that right now, and it'll probably be updated very soon. So if you have a specific request for some form of waiver, exception, or exemption, I point you to that guidance to look for recommendations and actual steps to contact FDA for requesting those requests.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have a few more questions that came in, and here's the next question. What types of measures are being taken to combat counterfeit and unregulated drugs being sold on the internet?
So FDA takes a multi-pronged approach in combating counterfeits and other unapproved and misbranded drugs that are being sold on the internet. And of course, it remains a challenge. So we partner and collaborate a lot with the affected companies and also other stakeholders, like there are other federal agencies that also have some authorities that we can build on, and other internet stakeholders like registries or registrars that have a role in managing certain domain and user and domain names. And so we've done a lot of different work. We do have some information on our website about our recent opioid online summits that highlight some of the strategies and collaborations that we've done most recently. So I'd point you to our website. Thanks.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have a few more questions that came in, and here's the next question. You mentioned standards, but what exactly are these standards to be met in order to be operating in an electronic interoperable manner?
So DSCSA directs FDA to establish standards related to exchanging of the data and information related to product tracing. And we issued a guidance a few years ago, and we're looking to update this guidance very soon. And so this will provide FDA recommendations for how to best accomplish exchanging the data. There, of course, might be other standards to consider beyond the ones that we issue in our guidances. In those, industry stakeholders have been working on those. And so I just want to make sure that the audience understands that while we will be issuing some standards in our guidances, there likely will be some other standards, industry standards, that you may also want to consider as you develop your systems to comply with DSCSA requirements.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question for Captain Jung. How do I know which trading partner requirements I need to follow under the DSCSA?
So as I mentioned, there are different trading partners, manufacturers, repackagers, wholesale distributors, and dispensers that need to comply with the requirements for product tracing, authorized trading partner, product identifier, and verification. And you'll need to look at how each trading partner is defined in Section 581 to assist you in determining which trading partner category you fall under. I will note that if you may meet the more than one definition of a trading partner, then you would need to comply with all applicable requirements, but not necessarily duplicate certain ones. So again, look at how they're defined in the law and see what activities you perform.
And we probably also have a guidance if you search for identifying trading partners that will also provide some more information to you.
Thanks for responding to that question. We have a few more questions that came in. And here's the next question. Are vaccines required to follow DSCSA requirements?
So in general, vaccines are required to comply with DSCSA requirements. Therefore, product tracing, verification, product identification, and authorized trading partner requirements apply. Now, remember those two definitions that I highlighted, product and transactions. Those will specifically say whether a particular drug is excluded or exempted from the definition, and therefore DSCSA requirements would not apply. So if you have a question about whether your drug is covered under DSCSA, just remember that if it's not explicitly listed in the law as an exemption or an exclusion, assume that DSCSA requirements apply. And of course, there could be some certain scenarios where, there could be other exclusions or exemptions, but you, in general, assume yes, if it's not listed in a specific exclusion or exemption.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have a couple more questions, and here's the next question. You mentioned enhanced drug distribution security. What are the main changes?
I think the main thing to remember for enhanced drug distribution security is that everything moves to be electronic. And so product tracing and verification will not only need to be in an electronic manner, the other key piece is that serialized and package level information. So that's the information that needs to be incorporated in the transaction information, and that will allow and enable product tracing and verification down to that package or unit level. So remember, the product identifier, which is now on physical product and will be also in the transaction information in 2023, will all have the NDC, serial number, lot number, and expiration date.
Thank you for responding to that question. And we do have another question, and here it is. What do I need to do to get ready for the enhanced drug distribution security requirements that start in November 2023?
I think the best advice would be to engage with trading partners and other stakeholders. So you can do this by talking to your trading partners, and those would be your suppliers or your customers, and think about how you need to make those connections with them to be able to exchange that DSCSA information electronically. It's likely that you're going to need to update or change systems within your company, and maybe likely with your trading partners. So there are solution providers out there that can help you with this if you don't already have that level of capability. You also may need to change processes, internal processes within your company. So don't forget to think about how you may need to train your employees on these new processes. So get involved with industry groups that are working together on the technical aspects. And of course, if FDA offers any kind of training or public meetings, we encourage you to participate and engage in those meetings.
Looks like we just have about a couple minutes left in our Q&A session, and we're going to try to squeeze in one more question, and here's the final question. Do trading partners need to notify FDA of suspect products using the form FDA 3911?
Yeah, there's been some confusion around the use of the Form 3911. So in general, no, not for suspect product reporting. The notifications to FDA using the Form FDA 3911 is intended for a trading partner to use when notifying FDA of illegitimate product. And remember, that's confirmed illegitimate product where you have credible evidence. And so that's when the 3911 form can be used. And that form, of course, can be used for other uses such as terminating the notification. Now, there is also one scenario for manufacturers only that they report to FDA products with high risk of illegitimacy, but that is only for manufacturers. So other than that, in general, if you have suspect product and you're conducting your investigations, you don't need to notify FDA of those suspect product investigations. It's really after you've determined that suspect product is illegitimate, that's when it becomes critical to notify FDA and other immediate trading partners that may be affected.
Well, that's all the time we have for the Q&A panel during this session, and we'd like to thank CAPT Jung for answering numerous questions that came in. We'd like to now transition to our next presentation on IT and Informatics Goals, CDER's Perspective. Our first presenter, Mary Ann Slack, serves as the Director of CDER's Office of Strategic Programs. OSP plays a lead role in many of the Center's strategic initiatives and modernization efforts, including development of benefit risk and other decision support tools, data standardization, lean process management, program analysis, informatics, capacity planning, and major user fee negotiations. OSP leads implementation of CDER's business informatics governance function in support of business modernization objectives. Our next presentation in this session is on the Electronic Submissions Gateway Transparency and Modernization. Our presenter, J. Lowell Marshall, serves as FDA ESG Information Technology Program Manager since July 2020. Previously, he was FDA IT Program and Project Manager, overseeing various infrastructure and software development projects from June 2005 until July 2020. Our final presentation in this session is on Standardization Quality Submissions and Assessments, PQ, CMC, and KASA. Our presenter, Dr. Norman Schmuff, joined the FDA as a chemistry reviewer in 1990. Subsequently, he served as team leader, branch chief, and associate director. Currently, he is a member of the management team in CDER's Office of Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Assessment. He currently participates in many of FDA's standards activities, including the FDA's Data Standards Advisory Board, CDER Product Data Control Board, FDA IDMP Group, and the PQ, CMC, and KASA project. Please join me to welcome our first presenter, Mary Ann Slack.
Thank you for the introduction. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to talk about what CDER is doing for IT modernization. So this is a session that will give you some learning credits, and we have a few objectives. After the end of this, you should be able to list some of the challenges that drive us to modernize, understand the guiding principles that CDER uses for its IT and informatics modernization, and identify some key initiatives and what the primary role is in this informatics landscape. So, what's going on? Well, first off, let me set some stage. The FDA, and you probably have heard this, but you know, it's pretty kind of cool. The FDA actually accounts for about a fifth of every dollar spent by U.S. consumers, and it's a huge chunk of money, as you can see, $2.8 trillion approximately. The change, the world that we live in and that we have to do our business in, the regulatory business, is constantly changing. The science is changing. It's getting more and more complex. Regulations change. Technology evolves. I think it's been a while, but I've heard every 6 months it turns over. And our workload increases correspondingly. It increases almost exponentially. And so really, the old way of doing things is just not working for us anymore. So what is that old way? Well, back in the day, it was everything was on its own server. It was specific solutions for specific problems. And what we found and what we continue to find is that you have a lot of overlap then, and you have a lot of reinventing the wheel. Every time you establish a connection from one system to another because you need to share data or what have you, it makes that spaghetti picture a little bit worse, a little bit more complicated. And the end result is a lot of redundancy, a lot of complexity, and a lot of time that we don't have. So the FDA a little while ago published a couple of action plans, the Technology and Data Modernization Action Plans, and very recently, like I think today, it's publishing another one, the Enterprise Modernization Action Plan. And those three together are really a call to action for us, and I encourage you to read them because they're short and they really kind of put into focus what we're trying to get at. So CDER's future state architecture is to take all of those silos and try and start building some common environments, some common design patterns, reusable components. If you could imagine in the old days, App 1, 2, and 3 are completely standalone with connections that are built between them. And so pretty quickly, it becomes a big fat spider web. And they all have their own data layers. Now we're looking at this means to build these common reusable components, overlay things, make it a little bit easier for App 1, 2, and 3, and Enterprise App 1 and 2, and so on, to actually connect with one another one time, connect without having to have and manage individual connections. We're also looking at this enterprise harmonized data model where everybody doesn't have to, in order to be able to use the data, you don't have to make your own copy, that there is data in an environment that is available, accessible, can be connected with one another, and it's well governed and it's well understood. And then, of course, the information exchange layer, which is critically important, that underlies the whole thing. So some of the features, obviously, are development acceleration, more ability to reuse and to introduce enterprise solutions for common processes, etc. So our guiding principles are critical to us. This actually drives us. They're our objectives. And I'll just walk through them because they're so important. I'll walk through them one by one. Cross-office collaboration, for instance, it's important to ensure that when we put something in place, it's going to be interoperable. It's going to be useful to the broadest group. Transparency, incredibly important to understand what the full life cycle cost of something is, what the impact is to any request to do work, to make sure that we in CDER are prioritizing what should go first, what should go second, who is going to benefit from it, and what the impact is going to be. Clear and repeatable business processes. If anybody is out there is in the business of IT, you know that all IT does for poor process is to shine a bright light on the problem. And so we need to make sure that they're as clear as possible, that they're as thought out as possible, and that we handle them in that way. Scalable enterprise business solutions. I just spoke about that a little bit, but we really need to make sure that things are going to grow with us because our job is growing. And then finally, minimizing duplication. Obvious, I think. So now I'll just talk about a few of the initiatives that we have going on. And each of these initiatives actually is in place now and expanding. The first one is our Next Gen portal. It's an industry-facing portal that enables FDA to exchange. It enables sponsors to submit things. It enables FDA to communicate out for certain things, not for everything. And it is not a replacement for the Enterprise Submissions Gateway, which you're going to hear about shortly. But it's really important, and it's already supporting 12 separate use cases. We expect many more to come into this. It's really been helpful for instance, in COVID, to be able to exchange information, request and receive stuff. Information management. One of the things that we're doing in information management is our new next generation FAIRS system. I'm sure that most everybody has heard of FDA's adverse event reporting system, and this is the next gen, FAIRS 2. Right now, it has more than 20 million adverse event reports, and we get more than 2 million a year that get submitted. So clearly, this is not going down, and we need to be able to actually have the most effective means of monitoring, of capturing this information and monitoring this and other safety data to make sure that we identify safety concerns as soon as possible and act on those as soon as possible. So the first release of this came out at the end of last year, and upcoming releases are going to support submissions of structured pre-market investigational new drug safety reports and supporting the E2B R3 format, which is a much richer structure, standard format for submitting. And of course, supporting other types of external safety reporting. The next one is CDER 1's analytics. So the CDER 1 system, if you will, it's really not a system, it's a cloud-based environment. And our intention is to have this be, in air quotes, a one-stop shop. So we have multiple sources of internal and external data in there. I think that we're up to 24 or 25 data sources now, with many more that are being integrated. These are data sources that are important for different types of activities that are necessary. And these data sources, by and large, have been collected and being used in separate, I'll call them silos, but in separate systems. This has the effect of bringing them all together under one roof, so to speak. So it reduces the multiple copies of the same data, which reduces the potential risk for poor data integrity because things change. This is really key for us, and it is in place now, and it's got a long way to go to, to grow into what we envision it to be. But it's already supporting about 21 analytic use cases. Then you have another workflow management, and that's our CDER Nexus system. It's powered by Appian. It's our enterprise workflow management platform, and we're enabling work processes in this, following that idea that we will do as much common as possible and leverage the little nuggets that are being built, the little components of each process for others, so that we're not doing the same thing over and over again. You can see the metrics here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time reading them, except that this is in place right now, as you can see, and there is much more underway in the next years and two. KASA. KASA is another workflow management system. It's being implemented in Appian, in that Nexus layer, that platform. It has already been put in place. This move into Appian is to ensure that we're being consistent as possible. This is really revolutionary for the quality assessments. And it is in place for some quality assessments, and it's being expanded to support more. Ultimately, all types of quality assessments will be handled in the KASA fashion. And I'm not going to spend more time on this either, because I think that there's another presentation that will elaborate more on this. So all of these together we think of as knowledge management. The data intake and the workflow management, they capture that structured information and unstructured information, and they capture information that's also developed as part of the business of doing business, of working through the process. And then the information part, the information management part, is capturing all of that data in a way, in an environment that enables the review and the sharing and the use of that data and the connection of all of that. And together, they really make up knowledge management. They make it possible for us to really take advantage of our data. None of that can happen unless you've got data governance, good data governance too. It's kind of analogous to a 3-bedroom house versus an apartment building, right? You can manage your 3-bedroom house, but it becomes increasingly more difficult for one person to manage a large apartment building with lots of moving parts and lots of stakeholders. And that's where you have to have a plan and you have to have a structure. There need to be roles and responsibilities, and that's what data governance is all about. We have data governance implemented in CDER and in FDA, but we're hardening it, we're strengthening it, we're expanding it to cover all parts of the enterprise and all types of data. And you can see across the bottom where we're really focused. We're focused on streamlining that operating model, on making sure that we understand the context of data. You know, this data might look like the stuff over in that data source, but maybe it was captured for a different purpose, and it's slightly different. It's got some nuances. We need to understand that. We need to understand the quality, and we need to trust it. And then we need to treat all data as an organizational asset. And we're well on the way to expanding this and building this out. And that's what's going on. So what's coming? Well, PDUFA VII is in the horizon. If you're interested, you can find the commitment letter online, and it's a lengthy read. I'll just warn you, but I'm going to. It still needs to be enacted into regulation, but I'm going to walk through what the thinking is, what the proposals are in the digital health and informatics space with that FDA and industry were talking about. And the first one is about digital health technologies. Now, if you're not familiar with digital health technologies, think in terms of those automated, those things like a Fitbit, for instance, those things that you would have that are health-related. They capture health-related information. For instance, a Holter monitor to measure your heart, insulin monitors, those kinds of things. And there's a myriad of those. AI-enabled implants, for instance. Well, these are just growing by leaps and bounds, and they have so much potential to really support the use in them in developing new drugs and monitoring, et cetera. And so FDA and industry determined that it would be really in our best interest to focus very much on this and build our expertise there in that space. And so the commitment is to establish a framework to guide the use of this DHT-derived data. You know, what information is usable and useful for what purpose, et cetera. The focused efforts then include expanding capacity, expanding our expertise, and enhancing consistency in this area. It'll include a series of public meetings, some issue-focused demonstration projects, and maybe some new guidance. So the other part is data and IT modernization. The first piece is an expansion or further enhancement of what we already do to ensure transparency of FDA IT activities and modernization plans. We have regular meetings between FDA and industry IT leadership. We will continue those. It establishes, though, very importantly, a data and technology modernization strategy that reflects FDA's TMAP and DMAP. And it's kind of the next level, if you could imagine, of the TMAP and DMAP. How are we going to go about it? And then it transitions the current ESG to a cloud-based, a much more modernized cloud-based ESG, and associated much more modern and streamlined identity and access management module. Continuing, CBER is in a position of just unprecedented expansion of new applications and science, and they really have a very legacy environment to do this work in. And so this accelerates, this helps to move their modernization much more quickly in order to support the expansion of all of the different scientific applications that they're receiving. And then finally, There's an exploration of how cloud and cloud-based technologies could promote innovation in the drug development and regulatory review process. We're going to do this through demonstration projects, and it's really to shake out what's possible and then move into making it so. And then finally is to support additional staff capacity and expertise to continue managing and supporting bioinformatics, and computational biology. So I think that brings us to challenge time. And I hope you found this informative, and we'll just roll right into the first question. So, why is the CDER I initiative so important to CDER? Your possible answers are: it holds important data that isn't available anywhere else. It's a cloud-based platform. It reduces the need for many copies of the same data. Or it sounds cool. Well, it sounds cool. So I'll give it just a second. Pick your best answer. And I hope you selected item C. It reduces the need for many copies of the same data. And boy, is that important. Okay, so question 2. Which of the following is not one of CDER's IT guiding principles? Minimal duplication of tools and capabilities to free up resource. That's interesting. Clear and repeatable business processes. Transparency around the full life cycle cost and organizational impact. And then cloud implementation wherever possible. So, give you a couple of seconds. Okay. Cloud implementation wherever possible is important, but it's not one of our guiding principles. And with that, I'll just summarize very quickly where we are. We're on this modernization journey. We're on it all together. It's really important to be more agile, to be transparent so that we can, focus on the right things, be efficient and effective, and continue to meet in the best way possible what is a much more sophisticated and increasingly more sophisticated and involving need of our community. We've made a lot of progress, but we have a whole lot further to go. And in fact, I don't think that the journey ever really ends, but we're getting there. And with that, I'm going to thank you very much for your time, and I'll be back with you and the other presenters for the Q&A session.
Hello, my name is Lowell Marshall. I am the IT Program Manager for the FDA Electronic Submission Gateway, otherwise known as ESG. I work in the Office of Information Management Technology, OIMT, which is under the new Office of Digital Transformation, which is headed by our Chief Information Officer, Vid Desai, which is under the Office of the Commissioner and the current Commissioner, Dr. Robert Califf. So the learning objectives for this presentation are: describe what ESG is, how it's used today, our relations with industry, how we communicate, collaborate with them, the usage growth of ESG over the past several years. We'll outline plans for current ongoing ESG enhancements, and then we will sketch an ESG next-gen future vision for you. ESG today. So we're very much like a postal carrier in that people send their mail, if you will, through the ESG to the ESG center inboxes. Here are the people who send the mail, right, through our web trader software. the AS2 protocol and system-to-system software. Health Canada also sends us via AS2. Send the submissions to the ESG. We put them in what we call center inboxes, right? And then the various center downstream systems will ingest those submissions from the inboxes for the downstream activities performed by each center in regards to these submissions that have been sent to them via the ESG. We do not read mail submissions, just like the postman doesn't read your mail. We don't open them, but we pass them along. Then, once it gets those downstream systems, they generate receipts or acknowledgments and send them back to the submitters. The ESG itself will create the first acknowledgement and the second acknowledgement. Some center downstream systems also generate a third and a fourth acknowledgement. So just like a certified letter, you get receipt that it has been received. In the transparency and collaboration themes here, we collaborate, we have meetings, we do reviews with PDUFA and various industry groups. We also are going to be doing some pilot testing on the account portal. We've been doing pilot testing on our new virus scanning functionality. You'll be hearing about all that in the upcoming slides. Annually, the leadership of FDA and PDUFA also get together to review the initiatives and progress on the letter of commitment and the plans going forward. We continue to participate in the quarterly meetings for PDUFA. We have one next week. Our leadership also continues to participate with the PDUFA leadership in their meetings. And we continue our collaborative activities with industry for major changes to the system. We're currently doing user acceptance testing for the virus scanning enhancement, and we will be doing user acceptance testing in the very near future for the account portal, which again you'll hear more about in a few slides. And this is per PDUFA. PDUFA 6 and 7 said that we need the transparency. Let's put some statistics out there on the work that the ESG does. So here we publish monthly the submission times and monthly and annual metrics. These are on the FDA.gov site under the ESG pages. So the usage of the ESG, this is 2015 through 2021, and I will note that this is all published up on the website. From 2015 to 2021, we had a 234% increase in the number of submissions. The definition for transactions here is the number of submissions, incoming submissions, and the number of outgoing acknowledgments or receipts. And as you can see, it's a slightly more than a 3-to-1 ratio because this includes the submission count and then adds the acknowledgement or receipts count to that total, to make that total. In a more graphic form for you, this is our average annual growth in what we call our cost drivers for the system. These are the outputs of the system. And in graph, we show you graphically. In the bar graph here, you can see 2021, there was a large amount of acts and submissions, etc. COVID placed the pandemic placed an added burden on us between 20 and 20. So it's time for your first challenge question. So which of the following statements is not true? ESG opens the submission file and reviews content for accuracy, or ESG delivers the submission file to the FDA center without opening or reviewing content, or ESG sends a receipt to the submitter to acknowledge the file has been received. We'll give you just a few seconds here. Okay, those who are paying close attention will know that the statement that is not true is that we open the file, somehow read the file and review it. We do not do that. Remember, we're just like the Postal Service. So here are the continued enhancements that we've started and we plan on wrapping up in 2023, and we've broken them down into 3 phases. Phase 1 is the Account Portal 1.0 and the submission virus scanning that I referenced earlier, targeting that for completion of August of this year. New front-end portal will automate the onboarding account management process, which will speed it up, and we should have fewer tickets submitted for issues with the account creation and onboarding process, and there will be a power user account available for industry so that a firm can have a power user manage and help with the user accounts within its own firm. And we'll also implement the enhanced enterprise virus scanning software at the agency level. So when it comes into ESG, it's coming into the agency. That's the first acknowledgement you get back. Currently, there's no scanning that occurs until we send it to the center at the center level. This is going to have another layer of security for scanning for viruses and malware, etc., before we send it down to those center inboxes. Phase 2 is what we call our core technology refresh, and there is some modernization enhancement that will be occurring as well. Targeted completion is September of this year. We'll migrate what we call the core components of ESG software to a GovCloud FedRAMP High infrastructure and the hardware contained therein and technologies. And we'll implement the Account Portal 1.1 with enhanced user functionality for the internal FDA center users in regards to information and data about their submissions and status thereof, etc. Phase 3 is enhancing the center inboxes and what we call the back end of the infrastructure, of the architecture, targeting that to be completed in 2023. Much of this streamlining will occur in the storage layer, and new technologies are coming out monthly at the GovCloud that we are hosted at. We'll modernize the submission receipt process with cloud-native technologies. We'll be able to decommission some of the COTS software that we currently use for that functionality. Again, this should be an improvement to the overall time it takes to receive and complete processing your submission. So what happens after 23? What's next? Well, we're going to continue to drive this modernization, and we have the PDUFA VII commitments and other FDA strategic initiatives to sponsor and support these modernization. PDUFA VII, and the letter of commitment that we have with PDUFA is that we will keep modernizing our cloud-based ESG, even once it's there, right, and greatly expand the data submission, bandwidth, and storage, while continuing to ensure its very stable operation. By the end of 2025, we'll complete the transition to the cloud of the new ESG, including setup and integration of an identity and access management solution that will help to streamline the applicant access to FDA resources, as we will have all accounts in one place and can manage them and whatever access they need or have in a single pane of management, if you will, instead of having different systems at different portals for the various centers. The FDA strategic initiatives that we will be aligning with are the TMAP, which just had its third birthday, the DMAP, which just had its first birthday, I believe, and the EMAP, which is brand new. Vid Desai, our Chief Information Officer, has been socializing this, and you'll be hearing more about the EMAP for sure in the coming weeks and months ahead. So, after 2023, we're looking at developing this next generation ESG. It's what I've been referring to. It's going to be a unified submission gateway, and that all accounts will be in ESG at that point in time. And the access and identity management solution, called an ICAM, I-C-A-M, will reside here. So everybody will come through one entry point for submitting whatever they need to submit to the FDA. That entry point will be much more scalable than the current ESG is. The usability, it should be a much better user experience. And the cybersecurity posture will be further hardened from the very hardened posture that we have currently. Once you go through that, then if you need to go to other FDA clouds and portals for conducting your business with FDA, you'll be able to do that. Or internally, we will be able then to go to other FDA systems and portals for the internal users of the ESG-NG FDA users. So the next generation ESG business process improvements. Here's a summary of the objectives to achieve them. As I've mentioned, we're going to streamline that industry account onboarding process via the ICAM solution and a modern, intelligent business process management platform. We'll improve the customer experience by reducing the number of help desk calls that they will have to make. There's going to be much more automation, as those issues should not be occurring nearly as often. And we're going to enable a more heightened two-way communications between the centers and users than exists in the current ESG and the COTS products therein. We'll improve the file transfer process, the speed, the size of the files, the successful transferring of the files, and the success rate. We'll improve the user management process, again, through the ICAM. It will be automated, single pane of management, and we'll be able to get to your, resolve any issues you may have in the user management space much faster, and will be more secure than we will have been previous to implementing the ICAM solution. And we can't be static. We got to have the flexibility to be able to support new use cases, as we call them. So we'll be sure to build in the capabilities into ESG for new technologies that may be needed to support those use cases. One example of that is we'll have a plethora of API connectors available for integrating with these other technologies, again, to be able to support the future use cases for ESG and for NGE. Here comes your second challenge question. How many phases are included in the ESG's 2021 to 2023 effort? 1, 2, 3, or 4? We'll give you a few moments. Okay, for those who said 3, there are 3 phases in that effort. Very good. All right, moving on. In a summary, the current ESG has been our central intake portal since 2005. Central, but not the only one. Since 2015, as I demonstrated to you, we've had double-digit growth each year going into 2021. and 2022 is trending in that same direction already. And we will modernize the ESG to accommodate a continued rate of growth well into the future, well into the life cycle of ESG-NG. We're certainly taking that action to make ESG-NG a reality, and so we can meet these unmet existing requirements and future requirements from industries regarding security, technology, and new technologies as they emerge. So that is what we had for you today with ESG and ESG-NG, which is coming. I hope that this was informative, and if you have any questions, I will be on a Q&A panel a little later in the day. And you can send your questions to that panel, or if you want to email them after the conference is over, my email address is on the screen. I'll answer as many of them as I can and as well as I can. So I appreciate your time today, and have yourselves a great rest of your day.
Now we'll turn from modernizing the submission gateway technology to modernizing what comes through the gateway, submissions. And I'll also discuss revising the assessment paradigm. So here's the outline, what our vision is, what we've done, some items related to structuring submissions, IDM, PICH, what we're currently doing, some challenges, and how you might prepare for the future of structured submissions. So the current model really is comprised of narrative PDF files, which are then copied, pasted, or retyped into narrative files, which are then entered into, some data is entered into FDA databases, and those reviews are put in document repositories. The possible future model that we see for structured submissions is that we would get what you might call a database-like submission, that is where data is marked with tags or other sorts of delimiters indicating what kind of information that is, which would then auto-populate some document, which would go in a document repository as it currently does, but also which would populate some FDA databases and allow us to populate some other systems related to facilities, for example, and also would allow us to populate review templates. What's important here is that eventually this PQCMC formats will become required under FD&C 745A 2 years after the publication of a final guidance, as some elements have also already become required under 745A. PQCMC and KASA, the diagram on the right shows the pillars which KASA is built on, and really it's about knowledge management and about risk ranking. And the structured application then will inform those pillars and present a new knowledge base that we don't currently have at FDA today. So PQCMC is a way that we propose to standardize and structure the submissions using XML, JSON, and currently the format that's proposed for the message is HL7 FIRE. HL7 FIRE is replacing HL7 SPL version 3. And we are generating control vocabularies and definitions that would populate drop-down lists that would be used in putting together the application. KASA, on the other hand, is a system that will facilitate pre-populated assessment templates, but more will do risk risk ranking algorithms will apply. And we will be able to pre-analyze data, we'll be able to do data analytics, and we'll be able to do comparisons across historical data. And we'll be able to do more knowledge-informed lifecycle management. We recognize that implementation of PQCMC will really change the business process, but it will significantly enhance the KASA system by removing manual data transposition, which is currently done in KASA to populate the template. So the important point to take away here is that PQCMC is about submission and KASA is about assessments. What we've done so far is we have worked across centers, CDER, CBER, and CVM. We've standardized some terminologies and definitions. We've modeled specifications, components, and composition. We've tested proof of concept with 7 pharma firms. We've harmonized data elements with the KASA system where we were working independently in the beginning. Subsequently, we now are working with a more collaborative, harmonized approach. We also have collaborated with stakeholders and other interested parties, including HL7 and the European Medicines Agency. What we've published related to PQCMC is a Federal Register notice in 2017 in which we made out certain terms and definitions. Largely these were related to specification. And we got a number of comments, actually on the order of 400 comments. Just collecting the main comments, we discovered they were about making this an international effort. That is, firms wanted to be able to submit one time, to be able to submit one document to many different regulatory agencies, and that terminology should conform to the ISO IDMP standard. And our response to that was that, our response to the international, you'll see on the next slide, the terminology response, we completed a 157-page mapping document where we discuss why many of the terms really are not full. We can't really fully map them because they really represent either different concepts or different levels of granularity. We also held a collaborative mapping webinar with pharma to discuss these issues. And we did incorporate some new terms into PQCMC based on our discussion and based on our mapping exercise. More recently, we published this year a Federal Register notice related to our mapping of the PQCMC terms to HL7 FIRE. The comment period closed. We received comments now from 12 parties, and so we have yet to analyze those, but we did receive comments from both individuals and from trade organizations. Well, what about the comment on PQCMC and globalizing it? We did propose a structured M3 structured quality topic to ICH, and it was accepted as a new topic. However, it was prioritized behind the completion of Q13 Step 2, which has already occurred, and some work by the new M4Q group, that is CTD-Q, which has only recently formed and started their work. I should mention that one of our office directors, Lawrence Yu, is the rapporteur for that group. So the SPQS group formation will be determined by the M4Q group. However, PQCMC will not stop. We'll continue because we need to do that to support the KASA initiative. And furthermore, we hope that it will form the basis for initial discussions in SPQS. What about IDMP? Well, IDMP really came out of ICH, but actually is now managed by ISO, the International Standards Organization. And its goal has expanded beyond the pharmacovigilance initial goal in ICH to include data elements and structures for the unique identification of medicinal products. There are 5 standards as listed here that relate to substances, products, and other issues such as units of measure, dose form, and so forth. So the comment that terminology should conform to the ISO IDMP is not so clear what that means, since mapping, as I indicated, is problematic. There are different levels of granularity. Many of the code lists are deferred to regional implementation, such as MPID, the medical product identifier. Some are regionally mandated. For example, FDA uses dose form terminology from 4 different sources. USP, SPL, Orange Book, and EDQM are dose form terms that are used at FDA. But PQCMC will be aligned where possible, but conformance frequently is not feasible, as we discussed in our mapping document. The reasons for standardizing terminology is to eliminate confusion about terms. What does this term really mean? Are these really synonymous terms? API and drug substance, for example, to enable an ontology, which really is about properties and relationships between them, to permit data analytics, such as is the example that's listed there, to facilitate risk ranking and risk assessment. And the controlled vocabularies that we propose to do should enable drop-down lists to be formed, so that this should facilitate the application process. One thing to note, for example, is that ingredient role for PQCMC is a controlled vocabulary list that we came up with. So there would be a drop-down list, presumably in the application, which would say, is it active, inactive, or adjuvant? I should point out that in the ISO IDMP, they actually are 15 ingredient role terms, but we, like EMA, decided that a smaller list really would better serve our needs, so we came up with these 3, and EMA actually is using that list plus that list of 3 plus 1 additional. So just to give you a little more insight, here's what we did when it comes to drug product unit operations. So the key element here, the unit operation, things like blending, compression, granulation, we broke that down according to different elements. That is, what is the category of the unit operation? And we had a lot of help from industry in creating the 2014 Manufacturing Equipment Guide. So we came up with some categories and subcategories based on that equipment guide. We also have equipment data, things like the blending speed, or process equipment data such as the type of blender, process parameters such as blending speed, various in-process controls, that is there online monitoring, material input, how much of what material is input when, and what the and a step ID so that we can carry through step by step. Also, we did consider established conditions, the new ICH Q12 concept. However, we decided we would defer that since that's a relatively new concept that industry and regulators are just now discussing the details of. So to give you a little more drill down about what goes on at our typical working group meetings, here we have a spreadsheet that lists the KASA terms and the PQCMC terms that needed to be harmonized and how we harmonize those. For example, at the bottom you'll see diluent filler. Well, does that mean excipients such as microcrystalline cellulose, or does it just mean things like that might go in a dry powder inhaler, such as lactose? So then the recommendation was who makes the change, what change is made, and what is the consensus term. So who adds what and where the term gets added. What we plan to do is to continue collaborating with these many groups, external groups, to continue our internal collaboration, and to continue to model other Module 3 and 2.3 CTD sections. That is, 2.3 is the summary, and to publish a draft PQCMC guidance estimated to come out next year that will focus primarily on components and composition and specification. So some of the challenges are that the IDMP standards have a slightly different use case than PQCMC. As I mentioned, they initially started out in pharmacovigilance. Not all of the IDMP terms are defined, whereas we did define all the PQCMC terms. Most of the control vocabulary coded concept lists are undefined. There are many diagrams that list the thing called CC, which is the coded concept, which is a control vocabulary list. There are many PQCMC items that are not included in IDMP, including stability, quality data for excipients, life cycle, batch analysis, control of excipients. Some of the other challenges relate to the diversity of standards, some of which are listed here. However, where in some cases there's a great diversity, in other cases there's a gap, that is, control vocabulary for analytical procedures was a list we couldn't find. Chemical and physical attributes, it would be nice to have that list, so we created it, but we had to create our own. And also, there is just a general challenge in resource needed to develop these data models and ontology. Also, we're looking for vendor support for HL7 fire transport format, although we don't really see that there's any current vendor support for this format for regulatory submissions, although in the EHR, electronic health record area, there does seem to be growing support for commercial fire-based tools. Also, we would have to, of course, modify the FDA infrastructure. That is, how do we present this data to reviewers? Do we present the native data? Do we pre-process the data and provide them with reports? Do we provide them with graphs resulting from the data? So those are some of the things that we have to do internally, and obviously there's a great deal of industry infrastructure that needs to be developed and built. Lastly, I'd like to mention that it will substantially change the submission process. And as I mentioned, will necessitate new business processes and infrastructure, and we recognize that that will require some significant investment on the part of industry. However, it will be years in the future before PQCMC becomes a required submission under 745A. As I mentioned, it's 2 years after a final guidance, and we've yet to issue a draft guidance. So it's probably at least a good 3 years. And we propose to do that in pieces. So probably the first thing to come out will be related to specification, components, and composition. And then we still await the formation of the ICH Structured Product Quality Submission Group. So what can you do to prepare for the structured data future? These are just some of my ideas. Obviously, you can follow what's going on with PQCMC, with IDMP, the SPOR development. SPOR is the EMA's implementation of IDMP. You probably are aware you could do that with, with Google Alerts, or, you can follow things on Twitter and social, and in the social media. You can start to think about collecting and organizing your data in line with IDMP. You can apply the master data concept, that is one piece of data that exists, that's the sole piece of data across your organization. You can group data according to ICH concepts, as indicated there, and you can do some data cleansing, quality control, and curation. So that.
Thank you all for the great presentations. We'll now enter into our Q&A panel session. As a reminder to our attendees, if you haven't had a chance to submit your questions in the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Looks like we have some questions coming in right now. The first group of questions is directed to Mary Ann Slack. And here's the first question. When will E2BR3 be available for IND safety reports?
Thanks, Jeff. That's a good question. We actually were going to roll out with E2BR2 and then determined that it would make better sense to just roll out for pre-market and post-market reports, IND reports and post-market reports using E2BR3. And so we're looking at 2023. We're looking at doing our testing in the first half and rolling out both of them in the second half. And that's what we're looking at. The update hasn't been made on the website, but it will.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question from Marianne, and here's the question. On an earlier slide, it looked like you said that FAIRS would cover pre-market data. Is that correct?
That's right. Pre-market, that's exactly it. IND safety reports or pre-market safety reports will be coming in through FAIRS in the same fashion that post-market data does, using the same standard.
Thank you for responding to that question. Our last question for Marianne in this round is the following. Which regulations protect the data privacy for digital data collected from personal devices? This
is a great question. And I'll tell you, I probably should have been more clear about what kind of data I was talking about. I'm assuming that this is in context. I hope that I'm correct in assuming that this is in context with the digital health technologies and the type of data that could be received there. To answer the question, of course, there's HIPAA. We certainly follow and comply with HIPAA to make sure that all personally identifiable information, personal private information is protected appropriately and can't be made available to anyone who's not supposed to see that information and only used for the purpose it's intended to be used for. We have FSMA, of course, which is the federal, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, I apologize, but FSMA is the regulation that requires agencies to annually review their information security programs and report on it. And they have to follow FIPS 200 and multiple NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, guidelines to ensure that minimum security requirements are met. And on top of that is FedRAMP. And FedRAMP is actually a program to assure that that consistent, effective, and appropriate security and risk assessments are performed for cloud technologies. It sits on top of, if you will, FSMA and all of the others to ensure that using cloud doesn't introduce some kind of a security issue or a security risk that's not known and contained. Now, back to my earlier assumption that you're probably asking around DHTs or digital health technologies data, I should have clarified that the only time that we don't receive all of that data. The only time we would receive data that's DHT generated is as part of clinical trials. And there are, anyone participating in a clinical trial has been provided with what would be sent, what would be collected, and how it would be used, and what would be sent, and they would have approved that. And we would only be receiving subsets of that too. We would not be looking for instance, everything that's coming out of a particular DHT. We would be looking for the specific data that is going to provide valuable information about whether or not the product that's being tested is safe and effective, et cetera. So I hope that that's helpful. I hope that I've answered the question satisfactorily. Thanks.
Thank you for responding to those questions. Moving on to our next panelist, we have a few questions that came in for Lowell Marshall. And here's the first question. Is WebTrader still using Old Explorer?
So, thank you for that question about WebTrader using, quote, Old Explorer. I think I have to interpret what Old Explorer means. I believe that what they are referencing there is the Internet Explorer browser, the Microsoft product that all of us used at one point in time or another. The last version of that we had at the agency, and that was just a couple years ago, was version 11, as I recall. So we work with many, many browsers, including Internet Explorer 11 and 10 before that, and I don't know how many versions before that. And so they come out very, very frequently. Chrome probably has 100 versions out by now. So you can do your testing with the ones that are used by most of your populace if you know what those products are. But no matter how you go about it, once you put your software into production and live, those new versions keep coming and coming and coming. So it's really difficult to test your product against all the versions that are out there, and then it's still just a snapshot in time. But to answer that question, yes, it still uses Internet Explorer. We actually capture that data, that browser data, from the users when they log into ESG. So we can then keep an eye on it and see if more of our user population is starting to switch, say, just for instance, from Firefox to Chrome or to Edge, etc. So as we do prepare for newer versions, we can be sure that we include the testing that is needed for the most popular browsers that are out there that people will be accessing the ESG with. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Lowell, and here's the question. How much of an issue have viruses coming through the ESG bin?
Okay, well, and I think thank you for that question on how much of an issue of viruses, and I believe the question also stated, they were not aware that there's ever been a submission failure due to viruses. And that's correct. We have never seen a submission failure due to viruses, but how we have ESG set up architecturally, imagine you have your yard, a nice square yard, and you got a square house in the middle of your square yard. Well, your yard is fenced with a chain link fence, and you might have a simple lock on that chain link fence, but there's lots of people you want who can access your yard, who may know the combination, etc. But then when it comes to your house, well, you got more locks on your house, right? Because it's tighter controlled with the access there. So, we do what we can along those lines. And I'm sorry, repeat that one more time. I'm sorry. So the point being that when the submission comes to the FDA at the agency level, first into ESG, there was no virus scanning or malware detection product in place. But when we sent it downstream inside the house, if you will, to the center level, that is where it would get scanned. So this is just adding another security control, one that's needed at the front door of the agency instead of counting on the front doors of each center, right? It's just another layer for security is always a multi-layered approach, and there are new variants and threats every day. So as long as you can get your business conducted, there's going to have to be somewhat of an overhead of security associated with that. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to those questions. Moving on to our next panelist, we have a few questions that came in for Norman Schmuff. And here's the first question. Would KASA implementation need the applicants to download or use any specific software?
Let me address a few of the questions that I see here related to KASA about KASA readiness for industry and about draft guidance potentially for KASA. KASA is largely an internal project that industry and applicants really would not see. All of the KASA interaction would be through the standardized PQCMC application. That is, the standardized data would come in. We would use that standardized data, for example, to populate the application assessment tools. We would use that application to do risk ranking, to apply risk ranking algorithms. For example, it's known for low dosage drugs that blending represents a higher risk than for higher dosage drugs. So you might imagine that we would apply an algorithm that flagged a risk that was higher for drugs that were in the microgram or low milligram region for a dose form. Consequently, there really is no plan for a KASA guidance, there is no plan for a KASA-related ICH topic for the same reason that KASA is largely an internal thing, an internal project that that we're doing and really is constantly being revised and updated. So it would all be through the standardized data that would come in through PQCMC.
Thank you for responding to that question. Looks like we just have a little over a minute left to try to squeeze in one more question. The last question will be for Norman, and here's the question. For PQCMC, will we be submitting electronic batch records?
Some binary file that's specific to an electronic, to a specific vendor. So we would not have that vendor's software internally. Otherwise, we'd have to have the software from all the possible vendors. So it would be then incumbent on applicants to be able to transfer that electronic batch record data into the standards that we put forth, mostly in the form of that data model that I laid out in terms of the batch of the unit operation. So no, we wouldn't accept the native batch records. They would have to be transformed into some data format that we would find useful.
Well, that's all the time we have for Q&As in this panel session. A huge thank you to all of our panelists for answering numerous questions that came in. We'll now enter